Thank you very much for the introduction of me and this event, Consciousness Club Tokyo, and thank you very much for inviting me for this talk. Today, I'm going to talk about consciousness aesthetics. So here is my introduction. Look at the painting, the figure. This is drawn by Mitsuhiro Ikeda. He is now an associate professor at the kind of art university in Kyoto. And I'm a big fan of his paintings. When I first looked at his painting, I strongly felt like I was really impressed. Like, oh, his paintings represent kind of what it's like to live in Hokkaido in winter. I don't know why I felt like that, but I really strongly felt that impression. And then later on, I knew that he was born in Hokkaido, and it explained a lot about my feelings. Perhaps, his paintings reflect his own experiences of living in Hokkaido in winter. But anyway, when I look at the painting with a mode of aesthetic appreciation, I have an experience that represents aesthetic properties of the painting, such as stillness and phantasmality. And through such an experience, I can appreciate the aesthetic properties of the painting, as I have mentioned. And this experience I had serves as an epistemic tool to enjoy or grasp the aesthetic properties of its object, namely his painting, right? And here, if I'm asked what instantiates the stillness and the phantasmality, I would point to the painting and then just say, this painting, right? So clearly, it's not my conscious experience, but the painting itself that instantiates those aesthetic properties like stillness and the phantasmality. So from this, we can get to the standard picture or view of, sorry, I shared kind of previous slide, but anyway, that's fine. So so that consideration lead to a sort of standard view in aesthetics. That is to say, in aesthetics, our conscious experience is a tool to enjoy and grasp the aesthetic properties of external objects or worldly objects, such as artworks or wild nature. On this view, our conscious experience is aesthetically relevant just because it can represent aesthetic properties of external objects or worldly features, or worldly objects. So because of that, we do not explore the aesthetic properties of conscious experience itself. Because aesthetic properties like stillness and well-balancedness or whatever are instantiated by external objects like artworks rather than conscious experiences themselves, right? And I want to oppose that standard view. But of course, I don't deny that conscious experiences serve as a tool to enjoy or grasp the aesthetic properties of the external objects like artworks or great nature. My point is rather that it doesn't follow from this claim that conscious experiences do not have aesthetic properties in themselves. So I want to demonstrate the possibility of consciousness aesthetics, which aims to explore the aesthetic properties of conscious experiences themselves, which have been ignored in the mainstream aesthetics. So my point is to say that conscious experiences themselves can have aesthetic properties, which can't be reduced to those properties, those aesthetic properties that external objects like artworks or natural entities have, right? So, and I'd like to clarify or introduce my view, like as a proponent of consciousness aesthetics, by answering 3 challenges to the idea of consciousness aesthetics. So here are the 3 challenges to the idea of consciousness aesthetics. So the first is the question that could be posed to the proponents of consciousness aesthetics, namely that what aesthetic properties can a conscious experience have independently from aesthetic properties of the object of the conscious experience, such as artworks or natural entities, right? And the second question that could be posed to the proponents of consciousness aesthetics, or my view, my idea, is how can we appreciate the aesthetic properties of conscious experiences themselves, right? So, we can know how we can appreciate the aesthetic properties of the artworks or natural entities. We can perceive those artworks or natural entities, and with some specific modes, we can appreciate those aesthetic properties of them. But we can't perceive conscious experiences themselves. Then how we can appreciate those aesthetic properties of conscious experiences themselves, right? And the third question which can be posed to the idea of consciousness aesthetics is that even if conscious experiences can have aesthetic properties, we seem unable to create a conscious experience as we can create an artwork, right? Artwork is a very concrete object. We can, create it. But conscious experiences are not like those concrete objects. So we can't create it as we can create an artwork. So given this, how important can consciousness aesthetics be for the field of art and elsewhere, right? So aesthetics is a discipline which studies the kind of aesthetic properties like beauty or sublimity of, artworks or, natural entities. So if through the aesthetics or aesthetic studies, if we know what kind of objects or products can have what kind of aesthetic properties, then we can apply the sort of knowledge to, the field of art. Namely, we can learn how to create great artworks, which can show a lot of different types of aesthetic properties through the aesthetics. But how about consciousness aesthetics? Even though we can learn much about, aesthetic properties of conscious experiences, how we can apply the sort of knowledge to the field of art? That's kind of skeptical question of the importance of consciousness aesthetics, kind of in a applied sense. All right. So I'm going to answer those 3 challenges, and by doing so, I'm going to clarify my point. So here is the first challenge. The opponent may say that what aesthetic properties can a conscious experience have, independently from aesthetic properties of the object of a conscious experience, such as artworks and natural entities. So the idea of the first challenge is like this. If I introspect on my experience of the painting, I realize that it represents the painting as being still and phantasmal. However, the stillness and the phantasmality are not the properties of the experience. Given this, is there any aesthetic property that my experience itself can have in itself, right? So that kind of challenge makes sense. So here's my strategy. I'm going to show 3 good examples of aesthetic properties of conscious experiences, which can't be reasonably counted as those of the objects of the experiences. So if those examples work, then I can show that conscious experiences can have aesthetic properties in themselves. So here are 3 examples: vividness, novelty, and well-balancedness. I'm going to explain those 3 properties in turn. Let me start with vividness. So I'm not sure whether you have tried a hallucinatory machine, but I have tried once one type of hallucinatory machine, so-called Lucia number 3 at the Sussex University previously, when I went there for a collaborate research. And that hallucinatory machine can produce a sort of psychedelic hallucinatory experience in us. So look at the figure. So here you can see the kind of light, and we sit in front of the light with eyes being closed. Then the light kind of becomes on and off in a very specific rhythm, like with a kind of different strength, like patch, 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 something like that, right? So after facing the sort of kind of dynamic change of switching on and off of the light, we start to see a sort of psychedelic kind of vivid, dynamic visual image like this. So that hallucinatory image is kind of active, kind of moving around, and they are really colorful and vivid. So, that hallucinatory experience that I had a sort of vividness, and which can be possibly evaluated aesthetically. I mean, when I have that sort of hallucinatory experience, I really felt like, wow, that's really vivid, kind of aesthetically great experience, right? So clearly, the hallucinatory experience had a kind of aesthetic vividness, but the point is that there is no external objects that can instantiate vividness, right? So the hallucinatory machine is not vivid in itself, and its program is not vivid in itself. So this is a kind of good example of the aesthetic property of the conscious experiences themselves, vividness. And perhaps aside from hallucination machine, you can imagine a meditation technique, right? So perhaps some people can meditate in such a way that they can have a sort of very altered state of conscious experiences, which may have some kind of aesthetic properties like vividness or some other kind of aesthetic properties. And that sort of conscious experiences produced by meditation can be a good example of the experience which has aesthetic properties in itself, independently from the external objects, independently from those aesthetic properties of the external objects, right? And here is the second example, aesthetic novelty. For instance, like if we can create a program of hallucination machine which produces a novel hallucinatory experience which have never had in the human history, Or perhaps if we can create a kind of meditation technique which produces a novel experience, novel altered state of altered experience that we have never had in the human history. And if they involve a pleasant feeling resembling typical aesthetic pleasure, then those experiences have aesthetic novelty, right? And there's no external object that can instantiate aesthetic novelty in that case. For instance, the program of hallucination machine is of course novel, or the meditation technique is of course novel, but they are not novel in the aesthetic sense, right? So of course I can create a lot of different things with novelty, like I can create a novel sequence of letters, like a kind of nonsensical sequence of letters. Perhaps, so if the sequence are long enough, then the sequence itself can be quite novel. That has not been produced in the human history ever. But of course, though the sequence of letters can be novel, but not novel in the aesthetic sense, right? It does not have aesthetic novelty. It's just a novel sequence of letters. So in the same sense, of course, the program of hallucination machine or meditation technique are novel, but not in the aesthetic sense. What is aesthetically novel is the experiences themselves that are produced through the hallucination machine and the meditation technique, right? Okay, this is the last example, third example, well-balancedness. Our ordinary conscious experience is integrative in the sense that it's the unified mixture of different kinds of conscious experiences, such as visual, auditory, imaginative, emotional, and the cognitive kinds. And when one kind of conscious experience composing of the whole experience is too intense or too salient compared with the other experiential components, we can say that the whole experience is holistically unbalanced. For instance, when I suddenly hear a very loud sound or noise, the auditory experience is so dominant that other experiences are back into the background. So consequently, the overall experience becomes holistically unbalanced, right? But in contrast, when all the kinds of experiential components are integrated with each other in a very harmonic manner, we can say that the whole conscious experience is holistically well balanced. For instance, if I sit on a kind of cafe in Paris, then just having a cup of coffee and seeing the people on there and listening to lovely French speech, and while thinking about philosophy and with a kind of peaceful emotion or whatever, in that case, my experience is as a whole really integrated. And because of that, we can say that my experience in that case is very well balanced in an aesthetic sense. And what's important is that here, the well-balancedness of the whole experience consists in the harmonic integration of different kinds of conscious experiences. So, the conscious experience does not necessarily represent anything well-balanced in the outside world, right? So in other words, there's no relevant, well-balanced external object that the experience represents. So why my experience is well-balanced? It's not because it represents something well-balanced in the outside world, but because it consists of different kinds of experiential elements which are integrated into a whole in a very much harmonic manner, right? So we can say that conscious experiences can have aesthetic well-balancedness in themselves, independently from outside objects or external objects. So far, I have addressed the first challenge by demonstrating 3 good examples of the aesthetic properties that conscious experiences themselves can instantiate. So let me move on to the second challenge, which says that how can we appreciate the aesthetic properties of conscious experiences themselves? So the underlying idea is this. In order to appreciate aesthetic properties of an artwork, we try to attentively perceive the artwork, right? In successfully doing so, we have an experience presenting the aesthetic properties of the artwork, like stillness or phantasmality. However, we can't perceive our conscious experience. Conscious experience is a different in ontological category from external objects or worldly objects. They are not perceivable. Given this, it's unclear how we can appreciate the aesthetic properties of conscious experiences, right? So here is my answer. So my answer is a bit long, so I will use 3 or 4 slides to complete my answer to that challenge. So I will start with the conception of aesthetic introspection. So we can conceive of aesthetic introspection in parallel to aesthetic perception, right? In the case of aesthetic perception, when we perceive a painting with aesthetic attitude means that like our attitude to try to capture the aesthetic properties like beauty or sublimity of kind of the targets of the appreciation, right? When we perceive a painting with that sort of aesthetic attitude, it produces an experience representing the aesthetic properties of the painting. Through this experience, we can perceptually appreciate the aesthetic properties of that painting. So here is the case of aesthetic perception. And my idea is that we can say the same for the aesthetic introspection. So when we introspect on our experience with aesthetic attitude, like capturing something aesthetically important in their experiences, it produces an additional experience representing the aesthetic properties of the experience. I'm going to explain this point further. For instance, when I introspect on my hallucinatory experience with vividness, with aesthetic attitude, like I have mentioned in the hallucination machine, I gain a positive affective or emotional feeling, which resembles sort of aesthetic pleasure that I would have when perceptually appreciating paintings with vividness, right? So when I had a kind of hallucinatory experience through the hallucination machine, I of course introspected on my own experience. Then, somehow try to capture the beauty or sort of vividness or some other kind of aesthetic properties of the hallucinatory experience through introspective on it. Then, at some point, I felt like kind of positively affective feeling. Like, wow, that kind of, how can I say? Yeah, it's hard to explain, but when I appreciate a painting with vividness, we may have a sort of affective feeling, like kind of aesthetic pleasure corresponding to the vividness of the painting. And when I introspected on my hallucinatory experience with vividness, I felt the similar feeling. So through that sort of feeling, I can introspectively appreciate the vividness of the hallucinatory experience. So here is a model. In the case of aesthetic perception, when I perceive a painting with vividness, it gives rise to a perceptual experience with a positive affective feeling. And that positive affective feeling contributes to my perceptual appreciation of that vividness, right? Similarly, here is the model of aesthetic introspection. When I introspect on my own hallucinatory experience with vividness, it gives rise to a sort of positive affective feeling. And the positive affective feeling contributes to my introspective appreciation of that vividness of hallucinatory experience. Of course, the positive affective feeling is integrated with the hallucinatory experience with vividness as a whole experience. But still, there are different experiential components. And, the point is that I first have hallucinatory experience with vividness, then after actively introspecting on it, I can further gain positive affective feeling. And through the positive affective feeling, I can introspectively appreciate the vividness of hallucinatory experience. This is the model. So here's another point. To perceptually appreciate aesthetic properties of an external object like artworks or wild nature, the control of attention, attitude, mental imagery would be required. For instance, when I appropriately appreciate a painting, I have to control my attention to the kind of holistic properties of the painting. So if I focus only on specific shapes or specific colors, then I fail to appreciate the painting appropriately, right? And perhaps background knowledge may also be required in order to appropriately appreciate a kind of conceptual art. So without background knowledge, we don't know how to appreciate the aesthetically relevant properties of the conceptual art. But if we know something relevant, like kind of what the conceptual art aims to show or something like that, then with the help of that knowledge, we can appreciate the conceptual art. We can appreciate some hidden aesthetic properties of that conceptual art. Perhaps we can apply that idea to introspection as well. Namely, if we can introspection on a conscious experience with controlling attention, attitude, and mental imagery appropriately, then we can gain an additional affective emotional feeling about the introspected conscious experience with aesthetic properties. And the affective feeling enables us to introspectively appreciate the vividness of the introspected conscious experience or some other aesthetic properties of the introspected conscious experience. So point is that in the case of aesthetic perception, we need to control a lot of things to appropriately appreciate the aesthetic properties of external objects like artworks or wild nature. Perhaps some knowledge is needed. The same can be said of introspection. In order to introspectively appreciate the aesthetic properties of conscious experiences themselves in a proper way, we need to control our attention or attitude and mental imagery appropriately. And perhaps some knowledge may be needed. So anyway, my answer to the second challenge, namely how we can appreciate these properties of conscious experiences, is that we can do that through introspection, through aesthetic introspection. And the aesthetic introspection can be modeled in parallel to aesthetic perception. So no problem. Okay, let's move on to the last challenge, third challenge, which says that even if conscious experiences can have aesthetic properties, we seem unable to create a conscious experience as we can create an artwork. So it's unclear how, the project of consciousness aesthetics can contribute to more like kind of real world art field or something like that. So how important can consciousness aesthetics be for the field of art and elsewhere? How it can contribute to that field? That's a question. So, here is my answer. We can create conscious experiences with aesthetic properties as we compose a piece of music. So I totally rely on the analogy to music. In my opinion, like a kind of, consciousness aesthetics is quite similar to aesthetics of music. Like, as we write a music score by which one can play a new piece of music with aesthetic properties, we can set out conditions in which one can enjoy a conscious experience with aesthetic properties, right? For example, like those activities include programming a hallucination machine in a specific manner, or creating a meditation procedure, or designing an atmospheric space to produce an altered state of a conscious experience, or a kind of mood experience with stillness or simplicity or peacefulness or other aesthetic properties, right? So, the point is that a programmed hallucination machine or rhythm meditation procedure on a well-designed atmospheric space do not have to be counted as artworks with intrinsic aesthetic value because they do not have aesthetic properties such as stillness, simplicity, and peacefulness in themselves. Rather, what instantiates those aesthetic properties like stillness, simplicity, and peacefulness are conscious experiences themselves, produced through those settings or procedures. Right? Here is an analogy. Music score helps us to produce music. However, a music score itself does not have aesthetic properties such as sadness and cheerfulness. It's music itself that instantiates sadness and cheerfulness, right? So, however, importantly, we appreciate we aesthetically value music, even though music itself is not spatially located and can be present only when it is performed. Music constitutes a field of art, definitely, without doubt. So to create a great piece of music is a great aesthetic and artistic achievement. Likewise, we can aesthetically value a conscious experience, even though it's not in itself spatially located, and it can be present only when someone has it. Because of that, conscious experiences can constitute a field of art as music does, to create a setting or procedure in which we can enjoy a conscious experience with positive aesthetic properties can be a great aesthetic or artistic achievement, right? And so this project, namely to create a setting or procedure or condition in which we can enjoy a conscious experience with positive aesthetic properties, can be called the art of consciousness. So this would fit very well with the recent development of experience controlling technologies such as virtual reality and augmented reality. So the idea is that if one creates a good setting or procedure or condition for us to enjoy a conscious experience with aesthetic properties, intrinsic aesthetic properties, they should be regarded as somehow artists of consciousness, as those who create a good piece of music are regarded as musicians. So in conclusion, like my answer to the third challenge, how consciousness aesthetics can be important for the other fields of arts is that consciousness aesthetics can constitute a new field of art, the art of consciousness. So far, I have answered the three challenges to my view that conscious experiences can have intrinsic aesthetic properties in themselves, independently from those of external objects like artworks or natural entities. So maybe I hope some of you are attracted to the idea of consciousness aesthetics and to see the potential of it in the field of art or perhaps in industry. Thank you. That's it.